I met Dan at USC. He was a real standout. You couldn't miss him. He was a wild man, unbounded by conventional reality. You couldn't call him an iconoclast because he didn't have icons to break. He could be very offensive and was frequently offensive on purpose. He was hot, emotionally hot, emotionally responsive, very angry. He was born and raised in rural Missouri and had no television. They didn't even have a telephone until he was 10. They lived in the middle of nowhere on 24 acres, and yet he knew all these things. They didn't even have a library in the town. His mother used to send off for boxes of books, and they would come and he would read them, then they'd send him back. Dan was always sneaking science fiction. His mother always wanted him to read good literature, and his mother would always say, "You haven't got any of that science fiction in your backpack, have you? You're not taking any of that science fiction to school." His father owned a curio shop. It was called Odd Acres. There was a sort of a screwy Louie room, where things are sort of off kilter and everything looks like it's leaning. And that was growing up in Odd Acres. One time his father faked a UFO landing. And Dan helped him and then had the press out there,
By direction of the President of the United States, stay in your homes. I repeat, stay in your homes.
Because in one moment of history-making violence, nature, mad, rampant, wrought its most awesome creation.
There's a lot of bugs there, and he was always very frightened, in a way, by the sudden appearance of bugs, like a stick insect and cicadas, massive invasions in southern Missouri. They would have hundreds of thousands of them come out of the ground and swarm over everything and then vanish and die. So these things really gave him the creeps. And he wanted to creep everybody else out, too. He was quite an artist. And when he was thinking of his monsters, he would sketch them out. Before Alien, Dan had written a screenplay called They Bite. It was Alien before Alien, and it involved a cicada-like creature, but instead of being 13 years underground, it was several million years underground. And gradually picks off the people in the encampment one by one. It's a version of an alien creature evolving, needing an evolution and being destructive in that evolution.
O'Bannon has this great line, says, "I didn't steal from anybody, I stole from everybody." And one of the places that he happily admitted that he stole from was a 1951 EC comic called Seeds of Jupiter. It's just 8 pages. It starts on an aircraft carrier, and this orb crashes onto the aircraft carrier, breaks apart, small orb, and it's got like 50 seeds. And there are 3 Navy guys on the ship, and they're wondering what it is. And one of them's called Peach Pit, and he likes to put peach pits in his mouth, and the other 2 guys sort of trick him into putting one of these seeds into his mouth. And then they slap the guy on the back. It's all good fun, and he swallows it. He gets terribly sick. He's dehydrated. It's emergency surgery. He's going to die. The Navy surgeon takes a scalpel, cuts open his chest. Everybody's shocked, and out pops this hideous, scaly, disgusting mini octopus. And then it literally scampers across the deck and plunges into the sea. And they go, "Well, we're never going to see that again," guaranteeing that they'll be seeing that again.
The origin of Death Rattle was in a farmhouse in Minnesota. The story itself is some sort of astronaut coming across an object. It's the kind of statuary that you might see in a temple in some ancient civilization. In the process of sending it back, he drops it, he breaks it, and he releases something that's about to change his life in a very horrible way. He's attacked by this thing that gets into his body. He is effectively raped. His eyes are gouged out and something goes into his head. And from that point on, he becomes a receptacle for something that's taking him over. Something is transforming a person into something very, very different, very unfortunate, shall we say. As a healthy young kid growing up in the Midwest in the 1950s and 60s, there were things going on in the world that didn't quite make sense. Television was very safe and cleaned up, so I clamored for things that I wasn't getting from my civilization, from my culture. Dan O'Bannon drew upon his experiences as a person from the Midwest, reading comic books at the drugstore like I did, and brought that kind of sensibility and that outlook on the world to this major science fiction horror epic. The Midwest may seem tranquil and civilized and so forth, but the fact is, you never know who's next door. You never know who's going to roll into town. You never know when the wheels are going to come off. It's like we're all, one cough, one kiss, one scratch away from, global disaster.
The influence of Lovecraft on Dan was considerable. The eggs lying dormant on the planetoid is comparable to the cicada's million-year life cycle, isn't it? Creatures coming out of the ground after being dormant for millions of years is superbly Lovecraftian, completely. I think that's a pretty straight line between the two.
Lovecraft, in his own day, was a pioneer of science fiction. More specifically, his brand of horror fiction, which he called weird fiction. He felt that the essence of horror is the unknown, and what is most unknown, it is what is out there in the depths of space and what has happened in the far distant past. Many of the features of Alien have a lot to do with Lovecraft's short novel At the Mountains of Madness. This is a novel he wrote in 1931, and it's something that he had wanted to write for a long time because he had been fascinated with the Antarctic since he was a boy. An expedition from Massachusetts goes down there and come upon fossilized remains of alien entities, which this expedition labels the Old Ones.
Looks like it's been dead a long time. Fossilized.
In the course of this novel, they become unfrozen and come to life. They cannot be defined by normal human or terrestrial biology.
I have confirmed that he's got an outer layer of protein polysaccharides. He has a funny habit of shedding his cells and replacing them with polarized silicon.
In fact, the explorers find this immense city that the Old Ones built hundreds of millions of years ago in the Antarctic, full of very bizarre architecture. There are these alien creatures that are virtually indestructible. They simply cannot die.
How do we kill it, Ash? There's gotta be a way of killing it. How? How do we do it?
You can't.
Classical science is based on the idea that matter is dead and inert. And this is true throughout Western consciousness, from Prometheus and Pandora to Adam and Eve. Space is empty and quiet. Is it? That's a perspective that we have. And I think Alien is very much the nightmare to that perspective. And you see this in the Coptic jars where they move. And you see this when you get out into the depths of space where it's supposed to be quiet and dead, and instead you find the boogeyman.
I cannot think of a film out there that comes anywhere close to Alien in capturing that overall Lovecraftian atmosphere. That planetoid where the ship lands is a prototypical instance of what Lovecraft called the fear of the unknown. It is a place completely uncharted by human expeditions. No big-budget studio wanted to put a lot of money into making a pure Lovecraft film, and so people like O'Bannon and John Carpenter and others had to sort of use Lovecraftian elements covertly to infuse Lovecraftian themes into works that were not explicitly based on any of his stories.
Alien didn't come out of a creative vacuum. It drew on a whole heritage of American science fiction.
You could make the argument that Alien certainly borrows from It, The Terror from Beyond Space from 1958. A crew of 10 goes to Mars to recover the lone survivor of a previous expedition. The rest of his crew has been wiped out.
Today, of all my crew, I, Colonel Edward Carruthers of the United States Space Command, am the only one alive.
They obviously think he did it. He says no, an alien did it.
What are you thinking about? Those 9 bodies you left down there?
Yes. But I didn't kill them.
Spoiler, it was an alien. The alien stows away on this ship and starts picking the crew off one by one. It's hiding in the air ducts.
Bullets, grenades, nothing stops it. What do we do now?
And it's killed by an airlock.
The Thing from 1951 is very present with the idea of this creature that kind of hatches, that mimics, that is in a working environment. You can go to the 60s and look at Planet of the Vampires, where they find this giant alien corpse.
Doesn't look like any ship I've ever seen.
Do you think it belongs to the Orions?
I doubt it. I doubt if the Orions ever built any spaceships. If they had, we would have...
Look, Mark!
One of the films that Alien draws quite heavily from is a 1966 film produced by Roger Corman called Queen of Blood.
Listen. We've been picking up these signals now for 3 days.
An alien distress signal is received by Earth. Astronauts go out to find the source of the signal. They land on a planetoid. There's this strange sandstorm. They go into an alien vessel. They find a dead alien sitting in a chair, encounter an alien who they're bringing back to Earth, and the alien begins individually attacking members of the crew. And at the end of the film, the humans are left quite literally holding a tray of her eggs. Is this the beginning of the end for humanity?
John Carpenter wrote in Dan O'Bannon to helping him make a student science fiction film called Dark Star. And it was about the crew of a spaceship, this might sound familiar, who are then assailed by an alien who sort of stows away on the ship.
Dark Star, that's the comic version of Alien. That's the one makes you laugh and the other one's going to eat you alive.
Carpenter wanted sole directing credit, and O'Bannon felt he had done enough to get co-directing credit, so they had this kind of big falling out. And O'Bannon's first thought is that, well, I can go and do this on my own. I will write a story, a science fiction story that will beat Dark Star.
Wouldn't you consider another course of action? For example, just waiting around a while so we could disarm you?
No. Because I'm not going to do a comedy, I'm going to do it as a horror movie.
The ship will automatically destruct in T-5 minutes.
You bitch!
A lot of things bothered me about Dark Star. We had an alien in it, which was a beach ball. It was our second try on that alien. I went away from Dark Star really wanting to do an alien that looked real.
Jodorowsky saw Dark Star, which is how he found out about Dan O'Bannon. Nobody in Hollywood was impressed with Jodorowsky. So he said, well, to hell with you. So he found Dan and said, come work on Dune with me. If you want to look to the first magic, I think you have to go back to Jodorowsky. Jodorowsky was his guru. He adored him. I've never met him, and I adore him.
Not only is there a synchronicity that connects Dune and Alien, there's almost an archetypal counterbalance between the two. If Dune is the Tower of Babel, Alien is exactly what brings down that tower. In the same way that Alien is the response to Prometheus trying to steal fire from the heavens, the movie Alien is also a response, energetically, archetypally, to the Tower of Babel project that was Dune.
When Dune collapsed in Paris, Dan came back and actually crashed on the couch in the house I was living in with a bunch of people because he didn't have anywhere to go, and he was completely at a loss. Eventually, we said, you gotta go. So somehow he wound up on Ron Chassette's couch.
I went to storage, got my typewriter out, took it over to Ron. She says, "That's living room." And over the days and nights of the next 3 months, Ron keeping me alive by feeding me hot dogs.
We were both starving. My wife was supporting us. We had 2 rooms. That's all we had.
He made up a board game called Poverty, sort of the opposite of Monopoly. You've got to land on enough spaces to pay the rent. You're out on the street if you can't afford to stay on the... It's absolutely a scream. In 1971, Dan was working on a story he called Memory. It's basically the first 30 pages of Alien.
I had this opening. I didn't know where it was going to go. I wanted to do a scary movie on a spaceship with a small number of astronauts. They're receiving a signal in an alien language. They go down to investigate. Their ship breaks down.
Dan called it Memory because some influence in the planet gradually made them lose their memory. But that's where this story ends.
He says, "Okay, I'm going to give you the first act I've got to this original horror movie I wrote. I can't get past page 29. Maybe you can help me do that." So I read it. 29 pages was almost exactly like you saw in the final finished product of the Alien movie. It was fantastic. Dan said, "There's a key to everything. The key is, how does the alien get on board?" His concept was always, it would come out of your stomach.
Dan had a very bad case of Crohn's disease, which basically appeared while he was filming Dark Star. So he was, 24, 25, and eventually killed him. But it was an intestinal disorder that sometimes felt like it was devouring him, I think.
Linda and I would sometimes have to take the emergency center in the middle of the night when the pain was so great.
And at the same time, he'd been having conversations with Ron Suchet about wasps that procreate by planting their eggs into other insects. It was kind of all these things were sort of coming together and were being sewn into the script.
Ron, in a way, was really fascinated with the idea of human beings being a host for an embryo. That human beings were the nutrition for an embryo.
He didn't have it in the script at all that it would implant something in his stomach and it would grow there. So I went to sleep, and I'm aware it wasn't dreaming. It was something else. It was when your mind is in the subconscious. I was wrestling with a property in my sleep. I woke him up and went right. It was 3 in the morning. I said, "I have it. I have it." He said, "What? You have the answer?" I said, "I have the answer. The alien fucks him." He said, "What? What are you talking about?" I said, "Jumps on his face. It's a little creature then, little baby squid-like, sticks a tube down his throat, starts feeding him air, but he's implanting his seed, and it's going to grow inside him and burst out of his chest in the middle of the movie."
There are over 1 million species of parasitic wasps. That means that of all the animals in the animal kingdom, the #1 form of animal is a parasitic wasp. There are wasps that like to make caterpillars their host. It can also release chemicals that control the behavior of their host. And everything it eats is going to feed these larvae that are growing inside of its body cavity. On the outside, they look completely normal. So John Hurt having breakfast, that's a caterpillar with wasps inside of it. And then once those wasps are ready, they just, blast their way out of their host, and if that's lethal to the host, fine, it doesn't matter. Ridley Scott liked to show film footage of one species of wasp in particular to his crew, and this is something known as the wood wasp. These wasps have to basically find a way to stick their wasp eggs inside of beetle larvae that can be deep inside of wood. So there are all these alien things that parasites are doing all around us, and scientists are trying to make sense of that in the way that the crew of the Nostromo is trying to make sense of it with the alien.
That's amazing. What is it?
Oh, yes, it is. I don't know yet.
Getting inside something else and feeding on it from within is a really great way to survive and evolve. The alien is just fitting into this fundamental, basic pattern that you find on life. Probably the most successful way to be alive on Earth.
Giger really came from Dan O'Bannon. Dan suggested him, and a stroke of genius.
Giger consolidates every monster from every mythology around the world into a single creature. He embodies the mythic other.
Jodorowsky went to an opening of some of Giger's artwork in Paris and brought the book back. Dan looked at it and was just knocked dead by the artwork. They were fantastic, sexual, mechanical, biological amalgamation that was completely new.
It does express Giger's own admiration for Lovecraft as a pioneer in, envisioning creatures far beyond human conception.
I think Dan and Giger met at the Lovecraft level, that sort of creeping horror, an unnamed horror that you are free yourself to define. Dan and Giger both had similar interest in the Necronomicon. While Giger was doing paintings on that theme, Dan was also writing his version of the Necronomicon, which I still have. It's unpublished. It's a printed work.
The first I saw of the Alien script was an early version. Dan O'Bannon brought it to me, and as I recall, the original title was Star Beast. I liked the script, and I wanted to make it. But I said to Dan, this really requires a bigger budget than what I'm able to spend. Why don't you shop it around and see if you can get a big budget? If you can't get the big budget, come back to me and I will buy the script and make the picture.
And a guy called Mark Hager got this script into the pile at Walter Hill's office. And it must have been a day when Walter Hill was at a loose end. And he happened upon Star Beast. Now, he thought Star Beast was one of the worst scripts he'd ever read. He just thought it was awful, but he stopped. Page, 30, whatever it was, and went, what the hell?
When Brandywine showed interest and optioned Alien, Dan was, of course, being a pest and insistent that they use Giger for the creature. This is a letter to Giger from Dan, dated July 1st, 1977. Dear Giger, this week I've moved into offices of Brandywine Productions, where we are beginning to make the design decisions for our film. The producers, Gordon Carroll and David Geiler, and the director, Walter Hill, are as excited as I am about the possibilities of your lending your unique talents to our picture. Look over the enclosed description of the designs we need, then let us know how much you would ask for the paintings involved. When we agree, we send you a check for $1,000 as an advance against future payments. Yeah, well, Brandywine didn't want to pay the $1,000, so Dan sent him a personal check for $1,000.
The face hugger, that was my first thing I did for Dan O'Bannon. He gave me explanation and drawings, and he said that he's jumping on a big egg. This egg is about that, so. And I thought that must be quite a big monster, so I did an enormous face hugger, and he was jumping. I thought he could jump when his tail is it's curved like a spring devil or the Jack in the Box.
And from those sketches, he went ahead and did the paintings. And that's why the paintings say Dan O'Bannon's Alien, because Dan paid for them.
Fox hierarchy come in to see some of the designs, and they fired him. Gordon Carroll friend said, this guy is just sick, get him off our lot. Send him back to Switzerland, we're having none of it. So Giger was gone.
Fox is full speed ahead with Brandywine. They're in pre-production. Walter Hill's going to direct the phone, and all of a sudden the studio gets a call from Walter Hill, basically where he says, "Yeah, I'm not gonna make this movie. I never really believed in it. I don't think it's that great, and I got another picture I'm going to do here. So, good luck. I'm out."